Love broke Kiara Monroe before she even understood what it was supposed to be. She was 9 years old the night her father stopped coming home. No warning, no goodbye, just the sound of her mother's muffled crying through thin apartment walls in South Harlem, and the realization that some people you love simply choose to disappear. That moment carved something permanent into Kiara's heart, a belief that would follow her for decades. Love wasn't gentle. Love wasn't safe. Love was the thing that made strong women cry in the dark when they thought no one was listening. But Kiara was always listening. In that cramped apartment where sirens sang lullabies and arguments traveled like smoke through every room, she learned her first survival lesson. Never need anyone the way her mother needed her father. Never give someone that much power. Never trust love to stay. Years passed, and Kiara built herself into something unbreakable. She discovered that numbers made sense when people didn't. Data had patterns you could predict. Algorithms didn't abandon you. While other kids her age worried about prom dates and Friday night plans, Kiara stayed late in the library, her notebooks filled with equations and possibilities. Her teachers saw brilliance. Her classmates saw distance. Both were right. She watched relationships crumble around her like clockwork. Friends' parents splitting, older cousins sobbing over text messages, love turning to ashes over and over again. Each heartbreak she witnessed added another brick to the walls she was building. By the time she graduated high school with a partial scholarship and 2 jobs lined up to cover the rest, Kiara Monroe had become fluent in the language of self-reliance. She didn't need anyone. Needing people was dangerous. College was survival. Tuition payments, rent deadlines, late shifts at the campus bookstore followed by early morning classes. While her classmates worried about which party to attend, Kiara worried about whether she'd make rent. But she never complained. Struggle felt like home, and when she discovered data analytics, something clicked into place. This was her superpower, seeing patterns others missed, solving problems with logic instead of emotion, building something concrete in a world that felt impossibly unstable. She graduated debt-free through sheer force of will and landed a position as a data operations analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm in Manhattan. Not glamorous, but solid. Dependable. Hers. By her late 20s, Kiara had constructed a life she was proud of. A modest Brooklyn apartment with framed family photos and plants she watered religiously every Sunday morning. A career where her intelligence was valued. Money sent home to help her mother replace that old couch, pay off medical bills, breathe a little easier. She mentored young black girls interested in STEM, showing them that women who looked like them belonged in spaces that claimed they didn't. She had close friends from church, brunch dates at black-owned cafes in Bed-Stuy, rooftop gatherings filled with music and laughter and people who understood her without explanation. Her community loved her fiercely, and she loved them back. But romantic love? That door remained locked, bolted, guarded by every memory of her father's absence and her mother's tears. Then came the Technology for Social Impact Summit. Kiara stood backstage at the Manhattan Convention Center, reviewing her presentation one final time. She'd spent months developing this project, a data-driven approach to optimizing resource distribution in underserved neighborhoods. Communities like the one she grew up in. Places where efficiency could mean the difference between families eating or going hungry. Her slides were perfect. Her research was solid. But her hands still trembled slightly as the moderator called her name. She stepped into the lights, faced a room full of tech executives and investors, and began to speak. Her voice was steady, purposeful, real. She wasn't performing. She was testifying. In the front row, Theo Langston felt something shift. He'd attended hundreds of these conferences, polished presentations from people trying to impress, pitches designed to extract funding, speeches that said everything and meant nothing. But Kiara was different. She spoke about her grandmother's neighborhood, about corner stores with limited inventory and food deserts that existed 10 minutes from luxury high-rises. She spoke about data like it was a tool for justice, not just profit. And when she finished, the room erupted in applause that felt genuine rather than obligatory. Theo found himself backstage before he'd even decided to move, waiting as she gathered her materials. When she turned around, slightly startled, he extended his hand. "That was impressive," he said. Kiara smiled politely, professionally. Thank you. I'm Theo Langston. She blinked. Of course he was. Everyone knew that name. Billionaire. Tech genius. Self-made. The kind of man who appeared in Forbes articles and keynote speeches. The kind of man who existed in a completely different universe than hers. They talked briefly about her research, her motivation, the community she hoped to impact. Theo listened without interrupting, asked questions that proved he'd actually heard her answers. And before walking away, he said something that changed everything. Would you like to grab coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about what you're building. Kiara hesitated. Every instinct she'd carefully cultivated over 2 decades screamed warnings. Men leave. Powerful men leave faster. Coffee turns into hope. Hope turns into need. Need turns into heartbreak. She'd seen this movie. She knew how it ended. But then she heard herself say, okay. 1 word. 2 letters. A door cracking open despite every lock she'd installed. Here's what Kiara didn't know yet. Theo Langston was about to teach her the difference between love that breaks and love that heals. But first, she'd have to unlearn everything her childhood taught her. So here's the question we need to answer. Can someone who learned that love always hurts ever believe it could feel safe? Their first coffee meeting lasted 4 hours, and Kiara didn't notice time passing until the cafe staff started stacking chairs around them. Theo arrived exactly on time. No entourage, no fanfare. Just a tall man in a simple sweater who remembered she took her coffee black with 1 sugar. That detail, that he'd paid attention during their brief backstage conversation, unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. People didn't usually remember small things about Kiara. She'd designed her life that way, memorable enough to be respected at work, forgettable enough to avoid emotional entanglement. But Theo asked questions like he was genuinely building a file in his mind labeled Kiara Monroe, things that matter. He asked about her mother, about growing up in Harlem, about the moment she fell in love with data. And when she turned the questions back on him, expecting the rehearsed biography of a tech billionaire, he surprised her. He talked about loneliness, about building a company that everyone admired but feeling like nobody actually saw him, about dinner parties where he was the most famous person in the room and the most isolated. Vulnerability from a man with everything, that was new. That was dangerous. When they finally left the cafe, Theo didn't try to extend the evening. He simply said, "Can we do this again?" And Kiara, against every screaming instinct, said yes. The second meeting happened 3 days later. Then 5 days after that. Then 2 days. The intervals shortened like gravity, pulling them closer despite Kiara's resistance. Theo never pushed. He operated with the patience of someone who understood that trust couldn't be rushed, only earned in small, consistent deposits. He showed up when he said he would. He texted goodnight but never demanded immediate responses. He asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. These tiny acts of reliability felt revolutionary to a woman whose father had taught her that men were made of smoke. Visible one moment, vanished the next. But here was Theo Langston, solid and present, meeting after meeting, conversation after conversation, proving that maybe, just maybe, some people meant what they said. Their first real date happened on a Thursday evening in late September when the air had just begun to cool and the city felt suspended between summer's chaos and autumn's contemplation. Theo chose a quiet cafe overlooking the East River, the kind of place that prioritized conversation over spectacle. They sat by the window as the sun set, painting the water in shades of amber and rose, and for 3 hours they talked about everything that mattered. Kiara told him about singing in the church choir as a child, how music gave her a language when words felt inadequate. Theo confessed that despite all his success, he sometimes felt like an imposter, like someone who'd stumbled into wealth by accident and was still waiting for the world to realize he didn't belong. They discussed faith and fear, ambition and anxiety, the weight of expectations and the courage it took to disappoint people. And somewhere in that conversation, Kiara felt something terrifying happen. The walls she'd spent 20 years constructing began to crack. But walls don't crumble easily. They fight back. The following week, Theo suggested attending one of Kiara's community workshops in Brooklyn. She almost said no. Her community work existed in a separate compartment from whatever this thing with Theo was becoming. Letting him into that space meant something. It meant this wasn't casual. It meant she was allowing him to see the parts of her life that mattered most. But she agreed, and on a Saturday afternoon, Theo Langston walked into a church basement in Bedford-Stuyvesant where Kiara was teaching 15 teenage girls how to code. He sat in the back, watching as she transformed from the guarded woman he'd been dating into someone completely alive. Encouraging, challenging, celebrating every small victory these girls achieved. After the workshop, one of the girls, a brilliant kid named Jasmine with braids down to her waist, approached Theo directly. "You her boyfriend?" Jasmine asked with the bluntness only teenagers possess. Theo glanced at Kiara, whose face had suddenly become very interested in gathering supplies. "I'm working on it," he said. Jasmine nodded approvingly. "Good. Miss Kiara needs somebody who's gonna stay." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Out of the mouths of babes came the truth Kiara had been running from. She didn't just fear abandonment. She expected it. Had built her entire emotional architecture around the certainty that everyone eventually left. 2 weeks later, Kiara attended a networking dinner with Theo in Manhattan. The restaurant was the kind where menus had no prices and everyone spoke in hushed tones about market disruptions and venture capital. Kiara wore a black dress that cost a month's worth of groceries from her college days, and she felt simultaneously powerful and fraudulent. The other guests were polite but distant, their eyes sliding past her to focus on Theo, the real attraction. One woman, a tech investor with perfect teeth and an Ivy League pedigree, asked Kiara what she did, then glazed over the moment she mentioned logistics. Another man literally interrupted her mid-sentence to ask Theo about his latest acquisition. Kiara smiled through it all, her church training kicking in. Be gracious, be dignified, never let them see you hurt. But on the car ride home, she was quiet. "You okay?" Theo asked. "Fine." "Kiara." She looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. "Your world and my world don't really overlap, do they?" Theo pulled the car over, right there on the West Side Highway, earning honks from irritated drivers. He turned to face her fully. "Those people back there? That's not my world. That's theater. You want to know what my actual world is? It's the moments I get to spend with people who are real, people who aren't performing, people like you." He paused. "If you're not comfortable in those spaces, we don't have to go back. But don't confuse discomfort with incompatibility." Kiara wanted to believe him, but belief required something she'd never been good at, faith in outcomes she couldn't control. Still, the relationship deepened. October arrived with its brilliant foliage and pumpkin-spiced everything, and Kiara found herself doing things she'd sworn she'd never do. She introduced Theo to her mother. That was big. Enormous. Renee Monroe had watched her daughter armor herself against intimacy for years, had stopped asking about dating, had made peace with the possibility that Kiara might choose solitude over risk. When Theo showed up at their home in Harlem with flowers for Renee and genuine interest in the photo albums documenting Kiara's childhood, Renee pulled her daughter aside in the kitchen. "Baby, he looks at you like you hung the moon." "Mama, don't what? Don't notice when a good man sees my daughter? Don't hope you'll let yourself be happy." Kiara's throat tightened. "You let yourself hope with Daddy. Look how that turned out." Renee's face softened with old pain and new wisdom. "Baby, your daddy's choices weren't about my worth or yours. They were about his limitations. Don't let his failure determine your future." The words settled into Kiara's chest, heavy and hopeful at the same time. That night, walking along the Brooklyn waterfront with Theo, Kiara felt the autumn wind carry away some of her resistance. The Manhattan skyline glittered across the water like a promise, and Theo was telling her about his childhood, about parents who valued achievement over emotion, about learning to succeed publicly while struggling privately. He talked about building his company during the loneliest period of his life, how wealth had arrived but connection hadn't. And then, mid-sentence, he reached for her hand. Just reached over and threaded his fingers through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Kiara's first instinct was to pull away. Her second instinct was to let him hold on. She chose the second instinct. and when he stopped walking, turned to face her with the city lights reflecting in his eyes, and kissed her for the first time, Kiara felt something she hadn't felt since childhood: hope. The kiss was slow, respectful, filled with warmth instead of urgency, question instead of demand. When they pulled apart, Theo rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. And God help her, Kiara wanted to believe him. November brought Thanksgiving and deeper integration into each other's lives. Kiara met Theo's parents, his father, a retired attorney who initially seemed skeptical of her, and his mother, a woman who collected art and asked thoughtful questions about Kiara's work. The dinner was formal but not cold, and by the end of the evening, Theo's mother pulled Kiara aside. "My son has dated many women," she said carefully, "but he's never looked at any of them the way he looks at you. I hope you'll be patient with him. He's brilliant with technology but still learning how to be vulnerable with people." Kiara almost laughed. Theo was learning vulnerability. She was the one who'd turned emotional unavailability into an art form. But that was the thing about this relationship. It was teaching both of them new languages. Theo was learning that sometimes Kiara needed space not because she was pulling away but because she was processing. Kiara was learning that Theo's consistency wasn't a trap but a gift. They developed rhythms. Saturday morning walks through Prospect Park. Tuesday evening calls when work kept them apart. Sunday dinners that alternated between her world and his. Slow, steady, building something that felt increasingly real. Which is exactly when Kiara's past showed up to remind her that nothing good lasts forever. Started small. They were at a gallery opening in Chelsea when a couple nearby began arguing loudly about whose fault it was they'd arrived late. The man's voice rose, sharp and accusing, and the woman's face crumpled in that particular way that comes right before crying. Kiara's entire body went rigid. Her pulse hammered. The gallery suddenly felt too hot, too crowded, too loud. She excused herself to the bathroom and stood there gripping the sink, trying to breathe through the panic. Those arguments. She'd heard them through thin walls her entire childhood. Accusations flung like weapons. Love turning poisonous in real time. When Theo found her 10 minutes later, concern etched across his face, she plastered on a smile. "I'm fine. Just needed some air." But she wasn't fine, and the cracks were beginning to show. A week later, during a quiet dinner at Theo's apartment, he mentioned planning a trip to his family's vacation home in the Berkshires over the holidays. "I'd love for you to come," he said casually, like he was suggesting they order dessert. But to Kiara, this was anything but casual. Meeting parents was one thing. Holiday trips implied permanence. Future planning. The kind of commitment that made her father's abandonment feel like it had happened yesterday instead of 2 decades ago. "I don't know if I can take that much time off work," she deflected. Theo looked at her carefully. "Kiara, what's really going on?" "Nothing. I just need to check my schedule." But nothing was becoming something heavy and suffocating between them. The real rupture came after a charity gala in December. Kiara wore a stunning emerald dress that made her feel like someone playing dress-up in another woman's life. All evening, people fawned over Theo, and several times Kiara overheard whispered speculation about their relationship. "Do you think it's serious? She's pretty but seems so different from his usual type. Wonder how long this will last." The comments burrowed under her skin like splinters. On the ride home, Theo was energized, talking about the donations they'd secured for various causes. But Kiara stared out the window, her jaw tight. "You're quiet tonight," Theo observed. "Just tired." "Kiara." He said her name like a gentle confrontation. She finally turned to face him, and something inside her snapped. All the fear she'd been managing, all the doubt she'd been swallowing, all the certainty that this couldn't possibly last came pouring out. "People like you don't end up with people like me." Theo pulled the car over. Again. This was becoming their thing, having crucial conversations on the side of roads because neither of them could wait. "Who told you that?" he asked quietly. "My life did." Her voice cracked. "Every relationship I've ever witnessed falls apart. My father left without looking back. My mother cried herself to sleep for years. I've watched friends' parents divorce, Cousins get their hearts shattered. Good women stay with men who treated them like options. Love doesn't work, Theo. Not for people like me. And you? She gestured at him, at his expensive car, at the world he represented. You could have anyone. Why would you stay with someone who comes from nothing? Who brings nothing to your table except baggage and doubt? The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Theo spoke, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who raised herself, who put herself through college working 2 jobs, who sends money home to her mother even when she doesn't have much to spare, who mentors young girls and shows them they can be anything, who stood on that stage and spoke about justice like it was oxygen. You think you bring nothing? Kiara, you're the most substantial person I've ever met. Tears were streaming down her face now. But I'm scared. I'm so scared that I'm going to let myself need you, and then you're going to leave, and Her voice broke completely. I don't think I'd survive it. Theo reached for her hand. I can't promise I'm perfect. I can't promise I'll never mess up or say the wrong thing or hurt you unintentionally. But I can promise I'm not your father. I can promise that when things get hard, I won't run. I can promise that you're not some temporary fascination to me. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You're the person I've been looking for without knowing I was looking. Kiara wanted to believe him, but 20 years of protective instincts don't surrender easily. I need time, she whispered. I need to think. Okay, Theo said simply. Take whatever time you need. But as the days passed, time didn't provide clarity. It provided amplification. Every fear grew louder. Every doubt multiplied. Kiara analyzed their relationship like it was a data set, looking for patterns that proved the inevitable failure. She found them everywhere. He'd been busy at work lately, probably losing interest. He'd seemed distracted during their last phone call, probably realizing she wasn't worth the effort. A friend texted asking how things were going with that billionaire. And Kiara heard the implicit skepticism. Men like that don't stay. Not with women like you. 3 days after the gala confrontation, Kiara sent a text that felt like throwing a grenade into her own life. I think I need some space to figure things out. Theo's response came 30 minutes later. I understand. I'm here when you're ready. That was it. No begging. No anger. Just respect for her boundaries, which somehow made everything worse because it proved he was exactly who he'd claimed to be. Patient, consistent, solid. And Kiara was the one running. A week passed. Then another. Kiara threw herself into work, staying late at the office, accepting every project, filling every silence with activity. Her friends noticed. Her mother noticed. Baby, what are you doing? Renee asked during one of their phone calls. Protecting myself. From what? From being happy. From being loved. From being left. Renee sighed heavily. Kiara Monroe, you are brilliant and beautiful, and so deeply wounded that you can't see when someone is offering you exactly what you've always needed. That man showed up for you over and over, and you're punishing him for your father's sins. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, baby, but love is. And you're about to walk away from something real because you're terrified of something that hasn't even happened yet. That night, Kiara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with Theo. The way he'd listened during that first coffee. The way he'd sat in the back of her workshop and looked proud. The way he'd kissed her by the waterfront like she was precious. The way he'd said, I'm not going anywhere, and meant it. And she realized something devastating. She wasn't protecting herself from heartbreak. She was guaranteeing it. By pushing Theo away, she was creating the very abandonment she feared. She was becoming her own father, disappearing from a relationship that required her to stay and fight and believe. The realization hit her at 2 in the morning with the force of revelation. Healing wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about risking it with someone who wouldn't weaponize your vulnerability. But what if she'd already ruined everything? What if Theo had finally gotten tired of waiting? What if she'd proven to him that she was exactly what she'd always believed herself to be? Too damaged to love properly. So here's the question that kept Kiara awake that night. the question that determines whether a person stays broken or dares to become whole. What if the greatest risk isn't opening your heart, but keeping it closed? The next morning, Kiara stood in her bathroom getting ready for work with shaking hands. She decided to reach out to Theo, to apologize, to try to explain what she'd been too terrified to articulate before. But as she grabbed her bag and headed for the door, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Traffic accident on your usual route. Might want to leave early or take the subway. Kiara chose the subway, which meant she arrived at her office building in Lower Manhattan 20 minutes earlier than usual. Which meant she was walking up the block at exactly 8:37 a.m. Which meant she saw him, Theo, standing outside her office building, waiting. He was holding 2 coffee cups and looked like he hadn't slept much either. When he saw her, his face registered surprise, then relief, then something that looked like fear, the fear of someone about to put everything on the line. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." Kiara's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I know you asked for space," Theo began. "And I've been trying to respect that, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About people like me not ending up with people like you. And I realized I never properly responded to that." He took a breath. "You're right. People like me, people who grew up with privilege and access and safety nets, we don't usually end up with people who had to fight for everything. You know why? Because people like me aren't usually strong enough to recognize that what you built matters more than what we inherited. We're not usually humble enough to learn from someone whose struggles we can't comprehend. We're not usually brave enough to love someone who won't settle for our worst behavior because they've already survived worse." Kiara felt tears building behind her eyes. Theo continued, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "So you're right. People like me don't usually end up with people like you. People like me get lucky if someone like you gives us a chance. And his voice cracked slightly. "I don't want to waste that chance. I'm not here to pressure you or demand anything. I'm here to tell you that I'm not leaving. Not because you need me to stay, but because I need to stay. Because you're—" He paused, searching for words. "Because choosing you is the most honest thing I've ever done." The coffee cups were trembling in his hands. This man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals was standing on a sidewalk in Lower Manhattan, terrified and vulnerable and completely sincere. "I asked for space because I was scared," Kiara whispered. "Not of you, of myself, of how much I was starting to need you, of what would happen if I let myself believe this was real and then it ended. I can't promise you it won't end," Theo said honestly. "No one can promise that. But I can promise you that if it ends, it won't be because I stopped choosing you. It won't be because you weren't enough. It won't be because I got scared and ran." Something broke open inside Kiara. All the walls she'd built, all the protective mechanisms she'd deployed, all the certainty that love only came with pain. It cracked apart like ice in spring. And what rushed through the cracks wasn't more fear. It was possibility. She started crying. Right there on the sidewalk in her work clothes, clutching her bag, tears streaming down her face while morning commuters flowed around them like water around stones. Theo set down the coffee cups and pulled her into his arms, and Kiara let herself be held. Fully. Without reservation. Without already planning her escape route. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry I ran. I'm sorry I let my past speak louder than your present. I'm sorry I almost threw away something real because I was terrified of something imaginary." "Hey!" Theo pulled back just enough to look at her face, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks, wiping away tears. "You don't have to apologize for being scared. You just have to decide whether you're ready to be brave." Kiara looked into his gray-blue eyes and saw something she'd been too afraid to acknowledge before. She saw staying power. She saw commitment. She saw a man who'd spent weeks proving through tiny, consistent actions that he meant every word he said. "I want to be brave," she whispered. "I want to believe this can work. I want—" Her voice broke again. "I want to stop running." "Then stop," Theo said simply. "I'll be right here." And in that moment, on a random Tuesday morning in December outside an office building in Lower Manhattan, Kiara Monroe made a choice that terrified her more than any spreadsheet or presentation ever had. She chose to believe that love didn't have to hurt. She chose to believe that some people stayed. She chose to believe that healing was possible. But making that choice was just the beginning. The real work, the messy, difficult, transformative work of unlearning 2 decades of protective patterns, that was still ahead. And neither of them knew yet just how hard it would be, or how beautiful it could become when 2 wounded people decided to heal together instead of alone. Because here's the truth about healing that no one tells you. It doesn't happen in the decision. It happens in the 1,000 small moments after the decision, when you have to choose courage over fear again and again and again. So the question becomes, when the fear returns, and it will return, will Kiara choose to stay? Or will old patterns prove stronger than new promises? The answer to that question would determine everything. So what does healing actually look like when you've spent your entire life believing love was synonymous with pain? It doesn't look like a fairy tale. It doesn't look like overnight transformation or sudden enlightenment. It looks like Kiara and Theo standing on that sidewalk, coffee getting cold, mascara smudged, both of them trembling slightly because they'd just chosen something that required more courage than either had ever mustered before. They'd chosen to try, not to be perfect, not to never mess up, just to try. And that Tuesday morning became the hinge point, the moment when Kiara's story could have continued repeating the same painful patterns, or could begin writing new chapters in a language she'd never learned. She chose the new chapters, but choosing them didn't mean the old language stopped whispering in her ear. The first few weeks after their sidewalk reconciliation were careful, tender, like 2 people learning to dance when one of them had only ever known how to run. Theo didn't push. He understood instinctively that Kiara needed to rebuild trust not just in him but in herself, in her own ability to stay present when fear showed up. And fear did show up. It showed up when Theo was late to dinner because of a meeting that ran long, and Kiara's mind immediately spiraled to abandonment. It showed up when they had their first real argument about something mundane, where to spend Christmas, and Kiara's whole body tensed, waiting for the relationship to implode the way every relationship she'd witnessed had imploded. But here's what happened instead. Theo showed up to dinner 45 minutes late with genuine apology and Thai takeout, because he'd remembered it was her favorite. And when they argued about Christmas, Theo didn't shut down or storm off. He sat down, took a breath and said, "Let's figure this out together. What matters most to you, and what matters most to me, and where's the middle ground?" This was the work of healing. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just consistent small moments where someone proved through action that love could be safe. December became January, and Kiara started noticing something remarkable. She was laughing more. Not the polite laughter she'd performed in social situations for years, but deep, genuine laughter that came from her belly and surprised her with its freedom. Theo had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he loved making her laugh, loved watching her whole face light up in those moments when she forgot to guard herself. They developed inside jokes. They created rituals. Saturday mornings meant exploring different neighborhoods in Brooklyn, trying hole-in-the-wall restaurants that Theo never would have found without Kiara, visiting bookstores where she'd read him passages from novels that moved her. Tuesday evenings meant cooking together in Theo's apartment, usually disastrously because neither of them was particularly skilled in the kitchen, laughing over burnt vegetables and ordering pizza when their experiments failed. Sundays meant church with Kiara's mother, and Theo sitting in the pew beside them, his bass voice blending with the congregation during hymns, his hand finding Kiara's during prayers. He was becoming part of her world, not replacing it, not dominating it, just folding himself into the fabric of her life with such natural ease that Kiara sometimes forgot to be afraid. And she was becoming part of his world too. She attended business dinners and actually engaged in conversations about market disruptions and technological innovations, discovering she had valuable perspectives that even wealthy investors wanted to hear. She met Theo's college roommate, his business partner, his mentors, people who'd known him before the billions, who saw him as Theo rather than Theo Langston, tech mogul. And in those spaces, Kiara started to see something crucial. Theo had been just as lonely in his world as she'd been protected in hers. They were both learning how to be truly seen. But integration wasn't always smooth. One evening in February, they attended a fundraiser where a woman Theo used to date approached them. She was polished, confident, exactly the kind of woman who looked like she belonged on a billionaire's arm. She greeted Theo warmly, then turned to Kiara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So you're the one who finally got Theo to settle down. How refreshing that he went for someone so authentic." The word authentic landed like a slap. It was code. Code for different. Code for not one of us. Kiara felt old insecurities rising like bile, but before she could respond, Theo's hand tightened around hers. "Kiara isn't someone I settled for," he said coolly. "She's someone I got incredibly lucky to meet. There's a difference." Then he guided Kiara away, leaving the woman standing there with her champagne and her calculated cruelty. In the car afterward, Theo was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I need to tell you something," he said. "There are going to be people in my world, in your world, everywhere, who won't understand what we have, who'll make assumptions based on net worth or background or skin color or any number of things that have nothing to do with who we actually are. And I can't control that, but I can control how I respond. And I will never let anyone diminish you. Not in my presence. Not ever." Kiara's throat tightened with emotion. "That woman was right about one thing," she said quietly. "I am different from the people in your world." "Thank God," Theo said fervently. "My world was killing me with its superficiality. You brought authenticity back into my life. Real conversations. Real connection. Real love. Don't ever apologize for being different. Different is what saved me." These moments, these declarations of commitment, these demonstrations of partnership, they were slowly rewiring Kiara's understanding of what love could be. But rewiring 2 decades of neural pathways doesn't happen without setbacks. The setback came in March during what should have been a celebratory weekend. Theo had invited Kiara to accompany him to a tech conference in San Francisco, framing it as both business and pleasure. Panels during the day, exploring the city at night. Kiara had taken time off work, packed carefully, felt genuinely excited. But on the second day of the conference, Theo got pulled into an unexpected crisis meeting that lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of Kiara sitting alone in their hotel room, mind spiraling. He'd promised they'd have dinner at that restaurant overlooking the bay. He'd promised this trip would be about them, not just work. Promises, Kiara's past whispered, are just pretty lies people tell before they disappoint you. When Theo finally returned to the room at 11 p.m., exhausted and apologetic, he found Kiara already packed. "I'm taking the red-eye home," she said, her voice flat. "What?" "Kiara, I'm so sorry about today. The acquisition we've been working on for months hit a snag, and you had to choose work over me. I get it. I understand the hierarchy." Theo looked genuinely confused. "That's not what happened. I didn't choose work over you. I handled an emergency that couldn't wait, and I came back as soon as I could. I texted you updates every hour. You promised we'd have tonight. And we still can. It's not even midnight. Let's go grab food right now. Walk the Embarcadero. Talk about, I don't want your leftover time." The words exploded out of Kiara with surprising force. "I don't want to be the thing you fit in after everything else is handled. I don't want to be," her voice cracked, "I don't want to be what my mother was. Waiting. Always waiting for a man who had more important things to do." Silence filled the hotel room like smoke. Then Theo sat down on the bed, his shoulders sagging. "Your father really did a number on you, didn't he? Don't psychoanalyze me. I'm not. I'm just..." He looked up at her, his eyes tired but kind. "Kiara, I'm not your father. Me having a work crisis doesn't mean I value you less. It means I have responsibilities that sometimes demand immediate attention. Just like you have responsibilities that sometimes demand immediate attention. Remember last month when you had to cancel our date because your data presentation got moved up? I didn't assume you were abandoning me. I understood that you're a professional with commitments." Kiara felt tears building. "It's not the same." "Why not?" "Because The truth lodged in her throat like a stone. "Because I'm always waiting for you to realize I'm not worth the effort. So every time you choose something else, even for good reasons, it feels like confirmation." Theo stood up and crossed to her, his movements slow and deliberate. Listen to me very carefully. You are not a burden I'm tolerating until something better comes along. You are not an obligation I resent. You are the person I choose every single day, even on days when I can't give you as much time as I want to. Life is messy. Work is demanding. Crises happen. But none of that changes how I feel about you. None of it. How can you be so sure? Kiara whispered. Because I know what my life felt like before you, and I know what it feels like now. Before you, I was successful and empty. Now I'm successful and whole. That math is pretty simple. Kiara unpacked her bag. They didn't go out that night. Instead, they ordered room service and talked until 3 in the morning about triggers and trust, about Kiara's abandonment wounds and Theo's guilt about having privilege that she'd never had. They talked about what partnership meant when two people came from such different worlds. And they made an agreement. When old fears showed up, they'd name them out loud instead of letting them fester in silence. I'm scared you'll leave became something Kiara could say, and Theo could respond, I'm not leaving. Let me prove it to you again today. Spring arrived with its annual promise of renewal, and Kiara felt herself softening in ways she'd never imagined possible. Theo had been quietly investing in the community programs Kiara cared about, not with splashy announcements or demands for recognition, but with strategic funding that actually made a difference. When Kiara discovered he'd provided scholarships for 5 girls from her mentorship program to attend a prestigious coding camp, she confronted him. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't about me, Theo said simply. It was about supporting work that matters to you. I don't need credit for that. This version of wealth, quiet, purposeful, generous without being performative, challenged every cynical assumption Kiara had made about rich people. Theo wasn't hoarding resources or flaunting privilege. He was using what he had to amplify voices that needed amplifying. And when Kiara suggested he come speak to her mentorship group about entrepreneurship, he didn't lecture them about bootstrap narratives or pretend systemic barriers didn't exist. He talked honestly about advantages he'd had, about luck and timing, about using privilege to open doors for others. The girls loved him. More importantly, they felt seen by him. You're good with them, Kiara observed afterward as they walked through Brooklyn. They remind me of you, Theo said. Brilliant and determined and fighting against systems that weren't built for them. How could I not want to help? Kiara stopped walking. Right there on the street corner where spring flowers were beginning to bloom in tree beds. She said something she'd been feeling for weeks but hadn't dared to voice. I love you. Theo's face transformed. Say that again. I love you, Theo Langston. I love your patience and your kindness and the way you listen like every word matters. I love how you show up for my community like it's your community. I love. Her voice caught. I love that you taught me love doesn't have to hurt. Theo pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her like safety itself. I love you too. I've loved you since that first presentation when you stood on that stage and talked about justice like it was oxygen. I've loved you through every moment of doubt and fear and resistance. And I'll love you through whatever comes next. What came next was the daily work of building a life together. Not moving in immediately, because Kiara needed to maintain some independence while she continued healing. Not grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but small acts of partnership. Theo learning to cook Kiara's grandmother's recipes. Kiara teaching Theo about her faith tradition, why the church meant more than Sunday services. It was community, history, resilience. They traveled together, to Martha's Vineyard where Kiara had never been, to Harlem landmarks that Theo had passed but never truly seen. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs, each other's languages of love, and crucially, they learned how to fight well. Because real love doesn't mean absence of conflict. It means presence during conflict. When they disagreed about something, and they did disagree often, they didn't weaponize each other's vulnerabilities. They didn't storm off or shut down. They sat with the discomfort, talked through the disagreement, found compromises that honored both perspectives. This was revolutionary for Kiara, who'd only ever witnessed conflicts that ended in slammed doors and silent treatment. Theo showed her that two people could be angry and still kind, frustrated and still respectful, disappointed and still committed. By summer, Kiara noticed something profound. She was no longer constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The hypervigilance that had governed her romantic life for decades had quieted. She could plan vacations without assuming they'd be canceled. She could introduce Theo to extended family without apologizing for his presence or bracing for his departure. She could envision a future that included him without immediately catastrophizing about inevitable heartbreak. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the balcony of Theo's apartment, which had gradually become their apartment as Kiara's belongings migrated over month by month. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, and Kiara felt something she couldn't remember feeling since early childhood: peace. "My childhood taught me love hurts," she said softly, not looking at Theo but knowing he was listening. "And now?" he prompted gently. She turned to face him, this man who'd been patient enough to wait while she healed, consistent enough to prove safety was possible, humble enough to learn from her experiences, strong enough to hold space for her pain without trying to fix it. This man who'd chosen her every single day, even when choosing her was inconvenient or complicated or required him to confront his own limitations. "Now I know love can heal," she said. "Not heal like making the scars disappear, but heal like learning the scars don't define you. Heal like discovering that what broke you doesn't have to break your future." Theo reached for her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm, a gesture that had become their silent language for "I'm here." "You did the healing, Kiara. I just had the privilege of witnessing it." "No," she corrected him. "We did the healing together. You healed me from believing love had to be painful. I healed you from believing success was a substitute for connection. We saved each other by being brave enough to be honest." And in that moment, on a balcony overlooking a city that had witnessed both their loneliness and their coming together, Kiara Monroe finally understood the most important truth about love. It's not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone committed to growing alongside you, someone willing to do the hard work of unlearning harmful patterns, someone who chooses you not despite your wounds but with full awareness of them. Kiara didn't need saving. She needed seeing. She needed someone who recognized her strength without weaponizing it, who honored her independence without exploiting it, who loved her fiercely while allowing her to love herself first. Theo didn't rescue her. He walked beside her while she rescued herself. And that made all the difference. Because here's what Hollywood gets wrong about love stories. The transformation isn't about one person fixing another. It's about two people creating space where both can become their most authentic selves. It's about partnership that doesn't erase individual identity but celebrates it. It's about building something together that's stronger than what either could build alone. Kiara's story isn't unique. There are thousands of women right now who learned the wrong lessons about love from childhood trauma. There are thousands of people carrying wounds they didn't ask for, building walls they're terrified to dismantle, running from connection because staying feels too dangerous. If that's you, hear this. Your past does not have to script your future. The person who hurt you does not get to determine how you receive love for the rest of your life. Healing is possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible. It requires courage to stay when every instinct screams run. It requires vulnerability to lower walls built for survival. It requires faith that some people actually mean what they say, that consistency isn't manipulation, that love can be both passionate and safe. Kiara found that courage. She did the terrifying work of unlearning toxic patterns and rewriting her own story. Not because Theo was perfect, he wasn't. Not because their relationship was easy, it wasn't. But because she finally believed she deserved love that didn't hurt. She believed it deeply enough to risk being disappointed. And that belief changed everything. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this. What wounded belief about love are you still carrying? What pattern are you repeating because it's familiar, even though it's destroying you? What would it look like to choose differently, to risk healing instead of guaranteeing isolation? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tell me about the love lesson you learned from childhood that you're working to unlearn. Tell me about the moment you realized love didn't have to hurt. Tell me about the person who showed you that commitment could be consistent and safety could be real. Or tell me what you're still afraid of, what's keeping you behind those walls. And if Kiara's story resonated with you, if you've got someone in your life who needs to hear that healing is possible, share this video with them. Sometimes people need to see someone else's transformation to believe their own is possible. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone know you see their pain and you believe in their capacity to heal from it. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about real love, messy love, the kind of love that requires work and courage and the willingness to become better humans. Hit that notification bell because next week we're exploring another story about choosing healing over history. And remember, your past wrote the first chapters of your story, but you get to write the ending. Make it a good one. What wounded belief about love are you ready to release? I'll see you in the comments.